And quite frankly, the hardest working people in the United States, for the most part, are the farmers. I'm related to a lot of farmers, so I'm partial to farmers. I have had gardens, and I've picked a lot of vegetables and fruit and growing up and even as an adult. And I'm proud of my farmer ancestors. And I'm proud of the stand some of them took. I was talking to a cousin of mine in Iowa, and he said, well, yeah, when DDT came out, he never used it because he didn't think it was needed, and it was wrong. He didn't want to pollute the land with an extra additive. And he was right on the spot on with that. We saw that DDT was terrible, and it eradicated something, but it tended to have effects that we didn't anticipate, unanticipated consequences. That happens a lot. And so, over the years, what we've seen is that farms have gotten bigger and bigger. And according to what I read something some years back that said in order to make money on a farm, you had to have at least 500 acres. And so a lot of the smaller farmers, your 20 acre, 50 acre, what you call your truck farms, and your farms of 150 acres, 200 acres, those have gone by the wayside because it's just not profitable. And what this has resulted in is larger and larger tracts of farms and large companies owning the farms. It's said that the majority of broccoli in the United States is grown in California, along with a variety of other vegetables. And when I'm thinking about farming and things like that, I think to myself, oh, okay, well, quite often you hear Californians brag about their agricultural abilities and how they produce so much of the crops in the United States. But on the other side of that coin is, well, how did they do that? Well, pretty much from the 1910, 1920 era up until the 1970s or so, the Californians relied upon migrant workers and people that they paid barely any money to harvest their crops and tend their crops. Cesar Chavez was a farm rights activist, and he changed a lot of that. That was after massive strikes in California in the 70s. What was the result of this cheaper labor that California had all those years? Well, the result was that anybody that was growing crops similar to California that were using, that they were having to pay labor costs that the Californians weren't. So when I hear people in California say, and this is nothing against the Californians, it's against people who take advantage of people. So they said, well, we've got the great agriculture. Well, that's only because you used illegal labor, didn't pay fair wages, and you pretty much drove farmers, small farmers, all across the United States out of business so you could have the big agribusiness in California. Well, as we look around now, we can see that it's important to have small local farms. It's important to have crops that are grown near where we live in case there's a pandemic, or say in case there's a crop failure in California, unusual drought, and there's no way for those crops to grow. Why should the entire nation suffer because of one section of the country, having failure, in agriculture? So what I propose is that we make any farm under 500 acres tax-free, all earnings. This will do several things. We need to, this will ensure that people who want to be farmers can go out and be farmers. In other words, if you say to yourself, gosh, I can buy 50 acres and I can grow some food. And if I do a good job of planting and tilling and caring for my crops, at the end of the day, I'll be able to make money selling this, like in a truck farm, or selling it, in farm markets in a city or somewhere. I'll be able to sell my crops. So we need to help the family farm and the small farmer. We need to help people become farmers that want to be farmers. There's something I discovered when I was gardening and working with the land. I didn't discover it as a child, because when you're a small child and you're a child and you have to go out and pick beans, it's not that entertaining. It's hot, sweaty, dirty work. When you have to process the beans, that's hot, sweaty work. But as an adult, tilling the soil and putting my hands in the soil and planting plants and going out and weeding every day and going out and killing the bugs and insects every day. And I would pick them off and kill them manually. I found that very satisfying. I found myself a little more in tune, and it seemed like the food that I was eating tasted better. And the fact is, I've never met a person yet who didn't have a garden who didn't feel somewhat enriched by having this. So I know that there's something to working with the soil that's beyond words. So this is what I propose, is that we make any farm 500 acres or less, but it can't be an individual who owns one farm here and another farm there and another farm there, or a company that owns, the large corporations will almost invariably try to game the system. And so we've got to watch out for that and legislate something that would be, and I would propose legislation to that effect, that we allow farms 500 acres and less to be completely tax-free. And this will strengthen our farm base and strengthen farmers across the nation, and allow people who want to be farmers and be successful at it. Be able to grow food. And so you'd say, well, James, I'm sure that you don't think we should use as many pesticides and insecticides and herbicides, and I'm sure that you don't believe that we should, and I'm sure that you believe that we need to grow more food. Well, what about the excess food? Well, I'm going to make a video about, probably a couple minutes, about the strengths of America and our weaknesses. But one of our strengths is that we can grow food. We can grow more than we need. And so if we did grow food more than we need, well, what would we do with it? Well, right now, a lot of food is going to waste. A lot of food milk is being dumped. Farmers with the pandemic have had a hard time getting their crops and stuff sent to market. But under ordinary circumstances, and fortunately, I don't believe the pandemic will last more than a couple years. If it follows anything like the Spanish flu of 1918, 2-3 years from now, we should be able to get more or less back to normal. And so that being said, we need to think in terms that sooner or later we will be back to normal. But what do you do with food when you have excess amount of food? Well, when I look at the aid that the United States provides to the world, a significant amount of our aid is in the form of military aid. And so my proposal is, instead of giving out so much military aid to people everywhere, which gives them the capability to kill their fellow man, humanity, that we buy the excess food, at market cost, so that farmers make money. And then we provide that food to people who are hungry, dying in the streets from hunger. Now, in the West here, we have North America and we have South America. And there's a spectacular amount of poverty in South America. And we could address a lot of that, and we could help build relations with our South American neighbors and Central American neighbors by providing some aid that fed their people. See, I think we'd get a lot farther in this world if the United States would step up and say, hey, and we already are one of the most generous nations in the world, but we could use that excess food that we would get if we had more farmland under till. We could use that to help shape our opinion in other countries. There's a real need for food in the world, and the United States has an ability to grow food quite nicely, and we have the resources for it. So we can strengthen the American farm and the farmers, and we can help the world. That's a win-win. And that's how we should look at it. We have an opportunity to make a difference in the world, and we can do it. We have an opportunity to make a difference in the United States, and we should do it. And when you elect me, I will make this one of my top priorities. Thank you.